Welcome to Life Beyond Abortion, the podcast where we delve into the untold stories and experiences surrounding abortion. Stories often missing from everyday conversations, media reports, and even other podcast interviews. I'm your host, Melissa Ohden, the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network. As the author of You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, I've had the privilege of hearing the most powerful stories from some of the most resilient and courageous individuals. These stories and these people have profoundly transformed my life, and I believe they have the power to transform yours as well. Together, we will amplify these voices, share the truths that they illuminate, and challenge our culture to recognize what life is truly like beyond abortion. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Life Beyond Abortion, the podcast where I get to have in-depth conversations with people to really unmask what life is like beyond the word abortion that we hear talked about in such really objective ways in our culture. Today, I am thrilled to introduce you to someone who I have gotten to know over the years, and I know you're going to appreciate this conversation both personally and maybe for some of you professionally. Greg Mayo with Almost Daddy. Greg, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks for having me on.
And did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You did.
Okay. I mean, that's where I have to start the day, as I think I did that correctly. Well, and that's the hardest part of this conversation. So nowhere to go but up.
You'd be surprised how many different pronunciations I've heard from my name over the years. It's incredible.
Do you have any?
But Mayo's what we go with. So.
Well, and everybody has a story. And, recently you and I were on a panel with Serena Dykson and, had this great opportunity at the Celebrate Life conference to talk about abortion healing. And, I know that is something that you professionally now work in that sphere, myself as well. But I think like many people, you've had your own experiences that brought you to this particular table. And I don't know about you, Greg, but when I was younger, I didn't think, hey, you know what? When I grow up, I really want to work in abortion healing. And, I'd love to be a public speaker and talk about abortion. No, most people don't have that within them. So what led you to this particular space?
Well, and first of all, you're right. This is nothing like what I thought I'd be doing. Even after I published Almost Daddy, the Forgotten Story, my novel, like 5 years ago, Melissa, I literally got up from my desk where I'm sitting right now, and I got in my truck and went downtown because me and a couple of investors were building spec houses in downtown Indianapolis. And I said, God, do whatever you want, I'm all in. So it wasn't my plan. But God said, oh, you're all in? Cool, watch this. And so it's been amazing, but really the main catalyst for it, for me, was that the gap between when I lost a child to abortion at 18 and when I finally entered healing was about 21 years. So when I finally got healing, the thought that just kept going through my head over and over was, what about the millions of men that are out there that were like I was for 21 years, that didn't know healing was an option, that didn't know they had a voice? Maybe if I go talk to groups of people, maybe I can reach some of those guys. And that's been my motivation for the last, 16 years now.
So you lost a child to abortion. And, I think it's always brave to talk about any of our losses, especially in our culture. But I think, when it comes to men and abortion, that is a particular, I don't want to say hot button issue, but I would say it's like you said, a gap, right? Something that we don't often see or hear talked about. And, if you could go back in time, Greg, I'm just curious, what would have made a difference for you?
Honestly, hearing anything other than it's her choice, you have to support the woman, all that, the cultural narrative is owned, operated, and controlled by pro-abortion groups. We understand that. And back then, I protested, and her mom told me, this is going to happen anyway. She said, you're going to go to college in the fall, and she's got a year of high school left. And so I would, if I could go back and say anything to that kid that I would say, dude, look, you're already a dad. She's not pregnant with a science experiment. It's a baby, right? So here's what you need to do. You need to step up and be a father. And that means taking care of her through the pregnancy. That means being a dad after the pregnancy. But the problem is that nobody was having those conversations back then. And in a lot of places, they're still not. A friend of mine, Sean Corcoran, the CEO of Men for Life, and I were talking the other day, and he's like, dude, that one interview you did is going viral on TikTok. I don't have TikTok, Melissa. And I'm not real sure what viral means either. But so I downloaded TikTok and I looked at the video, and there was a whole bunch of views, and I'm like, who are all these people? But what I'm getting at, I started reading the comments, and one of them said, and it was just me in the video, so clearly they were speaking to me, but one of them said, why don't you just do us all a favor and kill yourself? And that's not the worst comments I hear when I publish, especially in national publications and with videos. So it's a great toll, and that's the design, right? To shut men down and shut them up. But I don't know if it's a stubborn Scots-Irish in me or what, but I just refuse to back down off this thing now. I'm in too deep, and it's way too important.
That's an interesting point. I always tell people, no matter how you've been touched by abortion, all of us have much more in common than we do different. And so I think sometimes, right, abortion survivors are kind of put in this particular place in our culture and in the pro-life movement. And people have really not understood both the strengths and the needs of abortion survivors. But we experience so much of the same impact from abortion emotionally, mentally, spiritually, even physical manifestations, but also the shame and the attempts to silence us, because your point, Greg, is unfortunately so true. There's not a day that goes by that I don't open, our Google alerts or look at our SEO, and the vitriol towards abortion survivors. I can't even say out loud the things that I read, whether people are saying it about us, those of us that dare to show our faces or raise our voices, or how people use the term abortion survivor as actually just a horrible attack against people. Like somehow they're stupid, deranged. You fill in the blank. And so I think it's really hard for people who have been impacted by abortion to then raise their voice or whisper it to another person, because, men are looking in those TikTok comments going, I can relate to this guy and I'm grateful, but right. People are telling him to kill himself. So what does that mean for me?
Well, and that's the hard part. When I read comments like that, it doesn't hurt my feelings. Like, number one, you're nobody. You're probably a bot. But it doesn't bother me on a personal level. I've got 16 years in this healing journey now. But I do. You're right, Melissa. I think about the guy reading that's kept it a secret. That suffering and that silent shame, as we call it, and how it impacts him. And the other bad messaging, if we're just going to be real honest, comes from the church as well. There's a study that came out about 2 or 3 years ago about the impact of abortion on men. Now, follow me here. 7% of these guys said that they would go to a church leader or a clergy member for help with their abortion, regret, pain, loss, all that. Only 7. Now, over 60% of the men in the study identified as Christian. So there's a huge disconnect in the messaging from the church. And a lot of times it centers around shame too. So the church is supposed to be a place for the broken, right? And yet we have a group of broken men who they'll go to church, but they're not going to talk about what's really bothering them. And if I can just say this, one of the worst things I hear, and I've spoken so many different places around the country now, but one of the things I hear from men when they come up is, they'll share their abortion story, and then I'll ask them about healing. And they'll say, oh no, Jesus forgave me. I'm like, yeah, no, I believe that. He did me too, but what about healing? Well, no. See, I don't need to go to some program because I got forgiveness from Jesus. And it's one of the saddest things I hear, and I always share with them a quote from St. Augustine who said, God will provide the wind, but it is man that must raise the sail. Like, men hide behind that too, and it all funnels back down to the words you used a minute ago, which is shame. I can't talk about this at my church. What will my pastor think? What will the men I play ball with think? Whatever the case may be. So changing the cultural message and removing the stigma and shame surrounding men and abortion, I think has to be paramount importance at this point if we're going to change anything.
Well, and don't you think, I mean, I think it's sort of multifactorial in terms of how men are impacted the way that they are. I mean, first is that cultural message that, you know what, this is none of your business. That's her body, her choice. You don't get a say in this. And then the lack of any example in our society, by and large, outside of the pro-life movement, of men who are speaking out about their pain and regret, and then the healing journey afterwards. And then also this expectation that somehow men don't need help, right? Don't need support. Manly men are fine. How do we untangle all of that?
Well, so that's a whole lot to get through in 25 minutes, but I'm going to tell you from my perspective. Well, let me share it this way. John Eldridge, in his book Wild at Heart, talks about the need for intentional training into masculinity. We don't have that. 71% of teen pregnancies happen in a fatherless home, and over 54% of abortions happen in a fatherless home. We have a fatherless epidemic. And I don't just mean physically gone. There's other kinds of abandonment. There's emotional abandonment. There's, the be tough dad like you're talking about. So it's really important to change the narrative by modeling. And we have to model by impacting the culture. The culture is upstream, probably 20 years from true policy change. So we have to have, dads on TV who are strong, balanced leaders of their homes, not bungling idiots, which is what most television fathers are now. We have to have strong examples for our children. And I have 4 sons, and all of my sons will see me cry when it's appropriate, and I'll talk them through what I'm feeling and why I've allowed myself to cry. Now, the reason I do that and have done that their whole lives with great intent is because in my dad's 78 years on the planet, I think I saw him cry 3 times. He, to the very end, I tell people all the time, he went out Clint Eastwood. And I love my dad. I learned a lot from my dad. I'm not saying anything disrespectful. What I'm saying is he still had that tough guy mentality. And so that's the other thing I learned early on in my healing journey when I would go talk at churches or different places, is that somehow a man standing in front of a group of people sharing a story about something painful, and it doesn't have to be just abortion. That just happens to be my thing. But sharing a story openly and vulnerably, it somehow draws men out. It's almost like it gives them permission to have a feeling. I'm 6 foot tall and 200 pounds. I'm not a huge guy. I'm not a little guy. I'm just kind of an average guy. But you stand up there and you share, and then guys want to come and share their story. Some of them, Melissa, tell me 20, 30, 40 years, look, I've never told anybody this, but here's my story. And then the other thing I hear all the time from everybody, because I speak at a lot of conferences that aren't explicitly pro-life, and I've even spoken at some secular conferences, and those have been really interesting. But the other thing people say to me time and time again is, you know what? I never thought about the guy. And I'm like, how? How'd you think the baby got there, right? I mean,
well, and people say that even about abortion survivors. They're like, wow, I never thought. It makes sense that people don't think about abortion survivors. But yeah, I mean, we should be thinking about the men. And you're so right. I mean, when we go out and speak, folks like you and I are magnets for other people who,
Hmm.
have been sitting in their shame and their silence, waiting, right? Just waiting for someone, anyone, to set them free. And, for me, I think that's one of the most purposeful things that I've encountered getting involved in the pro-life movement. I mean, like you, right? Once you hear other people's stories and the great need, sort of like, you can't put your head back in the sand. And I can't, right? I won't, because if not us, then who?
Right.
Everywhere
And
I go, I still hear men's stories. You talking about being 18 reminds me of a young man that I have not thought about in a long time. And it was probably 10 years ago, Greg, at a high school, that this young man came up to me after I spoke at a school event. And he said, he was a senior, and he said, my girlfriend's in college and she's pregnant. And I want this baby, right? I want to support her. I don't believe in abortion, but I know if I tell my parents, they're going to kick me out of the house. I have nowhere to go, right? I need a place to live. And when we think about people not thinking about men, I don't know how many people then can even turn the corner in their brains to say, what about these 18-year-old guys who don't want the girl to abort, but feel the incredible pressure even within their family?
hmm and unfortunately, a lot of that pressure comes in faith-based families. That to me is a huge problem for a young Christian young man brought up in the church to say, "Hey, if my parents find out, they're going to kill me." I mean, gosh, I hope that's not the truth. You know what I mean? But and I'll share. I had a young man talk to me. He was 22, 23. It was about a year and a half ago, and I just asked him, "What's your biggest fear right now?" And he said, "Dude, I don't know how to be a dad. I work part-time at a coffee shop. Like, how am I going to do this?" And I said, "Okay, let's back up." Well, without going through the whole story, within just a few minutes of conversation, I found out that he was kind of interested in heating and air, furnace, air conditioners, right? That kind of thing. And I said, "What if I could get you an apprenticeship? I know a guy that runs a company. You have a full-time job, you start at X number of dollars and work your way up, you'd be making this, yada, yada, yada." Well, his face just lit up. Why? Because someone took the time to hear what his actual problem was and then provide him with a possible solution. The decision to abort is often made in a state of panic, fear, anxiety, right? So if you can calm the waves and dial that back a little bit, find out what the real problem is, or as my kids say, the real. I don't know. Do they say that anymore? I don't know. But if you can find out what the real problem is, then you can help him find a solution. Now, it was a year and a half ago, because he's still with the same HVAC contractor and learning, and the child was born and they're doing great. So, but and I talk to people all the time at conferences. You have to be a concierge for these folks that you're trying to serve, right? It's not just about stopping the abortion, although obviously that's hugely important. But it's the moment after, right? It's what happens next. And the other thing,
I think,
sorry, go ahead.
Greg, what I love too is by listening to him, understanding his needs, and helping to address that underlying need that he had, you're also tapping into that masculine part of him that wants to provide, wants to be that safe, stable person. I mean, when we talk about the issue of fatherlessness, yeah, right? We have a whole population of men who have nobody to turn to for help or ideas to help them grow in so many ways. And culturally, abortion is going, hey, we didn't need you anyway.
Right. And most of the society right now is going, "No, we don't need you anyway. You're just a man." And I can tell you, when my boys were in high school, I coached soccer for a long, long time. And I saw it over and over. These my house was full of random teenage boys all the time. But I saw the lack of intentional masculinity in their lives. These guys, my youngest son is 23, okay, and they go up from that. So they've been out of high school for a long time, Melissa, and I still have now adults in their 20s, adult men stopping by my house randomly, knowing their buddy doesn't live here, but they come to talk to me. Not because I share any great wisdom either. Let me be perfectly clear. They don't come because I have answers, Melissa. They come because I listen to them and I validate whatever they're feeling. A lot of times I'll tell them, dude, I don't know what you should do, but da-da-da-da-da, right? So it's not they come because I'm some guru or full of wisdom or always have the answers. Usually I'm a guy that'll feed them, listen to them, and pray over them. So I really... boys and young men are hungry for that. They just want connection. They need to know that they are welcomed into the community of men, right? And when you're told your first duty to protect your family, when you're told no, you don't have a say in what happens to your unborn child, that punches your masculinity right in the gut. And most guys aren't conscious of it, but when it happens, then it sends you down a path that, again, a lot of guys don't connect the dots. And I'll tell you a really quick story about that. It was about 10 years ago, I spoke at a church down in southern Indiana at a recovery meeting, Celebrate Recovery, if you're familiar with that. And afterwards, the thing that happens. Guys came up and shared their story. People came up and said, I never thought about the man. And I talked for a little bit, and then I filled up my coffee, and I went to walk out to my truck and leave. And there was some dude, older than me, standing by my truck. And I'll be honest, at first I was like, uh-oh, this ain't going to go well. But I walked up to him, and he said, I've been sober 22 years. I said, congratulations, that's amazing. He said, I ain't finished. I said, okay. He said, I never touched a drop of alcohol or a drug until my junior year in college. And when I did, it was 3 days after my girlfriend had an abortion. He said, until I heard you talking up there, I never connected the dots between my abuse of drugs and alcohol and her having an abortion. I still get chills thinking about it. And we stood there by my truck talking, I don't know, an hour and a half, 2 hours. I mean, just standing there in the parking lot. I didn't have the resources to help him at that time. But I think about him a lot. I think about guys that get engaged in these acting out behaviors that are a response to an abortion loss that never connect the dots of, oh, wait a minute. The abortion was the catalyst for this. That was the apex moment. And the reason they don't connect the dots, Melissa, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, is because they're told they don't get to have a thought, feeling, opinion, anything about it, right? So they believe the lie about the abortion and their ability to have any kind of influence over it or voice in it. And then things happen and they never quite get the healing because they never understand what the catalyst was. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And, I'd be curious your take on this, Greg. I know from, a professional clinical standpoint, even when I worked in the addiction field, we did not ask questions about women's abortion history. That's crazy to me.
And a lot of places still don't. It's not on their intake forms. And they don't with men either. I got invited to and by the way, over 40% of people, men in treatment centers at any given time have experienced abortion loss. That's about double the national average across all categories. So about 40% and close to 90%, by the way, of men in prison have an abortion story in their past. But so I got invited to speak at a inner city drug and alcohol treatment center here in Indianapolis about 2 years ago. And I'll be honest with you, when I got the invite through the email, through my website, I reached out to the director on the phone and I said, you understand what I talk about, right? And she said, yeah, no, I've seen a couple of your videos. I'm like, okay, sure. So I show up there at 9 a.m. Now, get this picture in your head. I'm at an inner city drug treatment center at 9 in the morning. My expectation was about 4 or 5 guys would come down the hall to see what I was talking about. Well, I was wrong. In fact, I had an exact opposite. About 2 guys didn't come. The other 93 did. So 93 men in the morning, a lot of them still detoxing, right? Got themselves together and up and down to the cafeteria at 9 a.m. to listen to some dude talk about abortion. My talk was 45 minutes, and when I finished, and you know, Melissa, you speak in public a lot too. When you're done, there's always people that want to talk, and you engage with them and whatever. Usually, at a thing like that, it's about 20 minutes, and then it dies off. I was there for over an hour after my talk. Guys connecting dots, making the connection between their drug addiction and their abortion loss. It was absolutely fascinating to me. And that's why we have to change the culture from there. That's why we have to get the word out, if you will, for lack of a better way to put it.
So where do we start? Because, I think of that, that adage of, how do you swallow an elephant? Well, one bite at a time, right? But we see the elephant and we're like, I want to eat the whole elephant in one bite.
Right.
So where do we start, Greg?
Well, that's a tough thing because you're exactly right. I am incredibly impatient.
Me too.
In fact, I started working about it and I got impatient about how slow it was coming. But so I'm incredibly impatient. I want to do everything now. But here's what I've learned and what I think I know today. So for me, it started off with my own healing, and then it started off talking wherever. That was 15 or 16 years ago. In that time, I've spoken to rooms of 3 people and rooms of 3,000. I've spoken at very hostile events where I don't think they understood what particular side of the conversation I was coming down on until I got there. One of them was in LA. That was really fun. But I think the big thing, like I said a minute ago, is that people always come forward after men and share their story. People become aware. So that was a big catalyst for me writing the novel, Almost Daddy, the Forgotten Story. Nobody had ever written a novel, a fictional story about a man's struggle after abortion. And I thought, well, maybe I could reach more people that way. And it's done well in the last 5 years, and it continues to, but there's a next step. The next step for me is I got to make the book into a movie. Now, the problem is I don't know anything about making movies. A little problem. It'd be like me saying I got to change the engine of my truck, and I'm not a mechanic. But all that to say, all those things, and including my desire to have it made into a movie, it's about the cultural impact. And I've done this experiment before. I almost did it when you and I were in D.C. with Serena. If I stood up and I started quoting that line toward the end of Gladiator, where Commodus finally figures out who he is, and I got halfway through that in a room full of 100 men, probably 90 of them would be able to finish the quote for me. Men communicate through movies. They see themselves in stories. So we have to impact the culture. We have to influence the cultural narrative to make men realize that it's not asking for a seat at the table, it's claiming your seat at the table. And it's also kind of to our point before about lack of authentic masculinity and fatherlessness and all that stuff. It's calling men to a higher purpose. It's calling men to be fathered by God and to stand up for their godly purpose, which is to lead in a biblical way. And what that means is to lead for the right thing, to protect women, children, the elderly, to do the right thing, to be full of character and honesty. And it sounds like a tall order. It sounds like a whole bunch of stuff. I understand that. And your listeners are probably like, this dude's out of his mind. But I'm telling you, this is how we do it. And we do it one person at a time. So if we can replicate that and do 20 people at a time or 20,000 people at a time, we start shifting the culture. And I've already seen it. Look, I'm laughing because I get called to to go speak at PRCs a lot and train staff. And I laugh because 14 years ago, I reached out to the PRCs in my area and I said, hey, this is who I am and what I've done, and I've been through this healing journey, and I want to volunteer, I want to help. Every one of them back then, Melissa, said the same thing. Oh, yeah, we really don't have stuff for guys to do. I'm like, can I come and fix a door handle? I mean, is there anything I can do? But so even that started to change. Roe being overturned was a huge thing. It wasn't the victory I think a lot of people thought it was. But we did take some ground on the battlefield for sure. But one thing it did that was tremendous was it brought the abortion conversation back to the forefront. So we've got a ton of work to do. We've got a ton of work. And it involves reaching people and encouraging men to do the manly thing. I guess that's the best way I can sum it up.
Yeah, and I appreciate about you that you have the vision and the passion to know how you are called to be part of that solution, right? As someone who has a personal story, who also now has a professional background, who can reach people and you can help serve them, but also then you can connect them to other places like pregnancy centers for ongoing support. So as we wrap up, Greg, let's talk about some of the supports that exist for men. I know there aren't a lot, but there are some. So what's out there for men that are listening?
Well, there's a growing body of resources, thank goodness, for men, written by men. And look, a lot of the men's abortion healing resources are written by women. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just men and women think different and they talk different to each other. So the growing body of stuff available for men is incredible. There are PRCs now sprouting up around the country that are becoming more men-focused. Matt Haviland up in Michigan is doing a great thing. They actually put a men's center across the street from the PRC. And the guys go hang out there. And they're serving hundreds and hundreds of guys now. So there's all these kinds of opportunities. Men for Life, who I mentioned, my buddy is the CEO earlier. I recently joined their board of directors because Sean and the board have a vision of being a resource hub, providing resources for men, a place for them to go, a place for them to connect. So there are a lot of, and of course, even groups like Save One. Back in the day when I started my journey, I read every book I could find on men and abortion, which there wasn't a whole lot. But one of the best ones I read back then was Save One's book. CareNet's putting a stronger focus on men, and I'm meeting the guys that are running that for them. Heartbeat, I spoke at Heartbeat in April down in Birmingham. Heartbeat's putting a greater focus. And it's not just the focus on healing men after abortion, it's also a focus on dad programs, how to train a dad, how to become a dad, right? If you don't have any idea, if you didn't grow up with an example or a good one. So I'm encouraged, and I'm always the sunny side guy. I always look at the positive. But I'm super encouraged by the amount of resources and awareness that's coming to men and abortion. So I think we're on a good footing. I think there's a lot out there. If I said it all too fast, email me and whoever's listening, I'll send you a list.
Yeah, no, and that's perfect. We can put something in the transcript. And I agree with you, Greg. I think we have come a long way in the pro-life movement. It's just difficult, not just because we're impatient, but because it has been an issue for so long that there is such a great need. And so, we feel kind of that gravity of knowing that we have, tens of millions of men who have never been supported in their healing, and we want to serve them and also play catch up right now and meet these men where they're at to stem the tide. But yeah, none of us have to do it alone. And I love that everyone is connecting, right, as professionals in this sphere of the pro-life movement. And you know what, God willing, I do believe that there are men on the other side of the issue who see themselves as pro-choice, who we can build bridges to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'll tell you, when we were in D.C., I don't know if you went down and talked to this dude, but there were some protesters outside the event center. And of course, me being me, I went down and tried to talk to him, realized they were what they were. And so I took a selfie with them and made some jokes. But later I went down, there was one guy left, and I talked to him. And I talked to him for probably a good 15 minutes. I didn't try to convince him of anything. I tried to build a relationship because to him, I'm just some dude, in his words, with a funny accent. But I'm like, what do you mean, Bubby? But I just tried to build that bridge you're talking about, tried to have the conversation, because I think most men are pro-abortion, pro-choice, either because they've been taught that and they've never really critically thought about it themselves, or for selfish reasons. A lot of men are pro-choice for selfish reasons, let's be honest. Because I can act irresponsibly and then have no responsibility on the other side. So, but we can have those conversations, but you have them openly, honestly, and vulnerably. And some guys will and some guys won't. I got guys, I still hold a real estate license. I still do real estate work here in the Indy area. There are guys at my brokerage who have come up to me and said, I can't believe you put all these videos out. What are you doing? You're going to hurt your business. They have, the two guys I'm thinking of, they have their own abortion stories that they will never talk about publicly, even though they have pain, and every time I see them, they want to talk to me about it. And it's cost me business, right? There's a cost to doing this and to having these conversations, but if we can get men that are pro-choice to see that the level of honor in being a man who protects life and doing the right thing, and how they will feel better about themselves and their place in the world. If we can get just a few guys to start coming over and seeing that, then I think we have even a better chance of changing it, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And, people often ask that about abortion survivors, oh, are there men who survive? Because all we ever see are the women. Yeah, well, it's because it's complicated for men, because of, the cultural response to men. And, so many men that we work with at the Abortion Survivors Network are professionals, and they are fully aware of what is expected of them in their profession. And as providers for their family, they can't risk, in their opinion, right? They cannot risk their employment, their profession, all those things. And it shouldn't be that way. But that's where we've been at.
Yeah, and it was a hard decision. I talked to my wife and my sons before I released the novel because I knew what it would do. At the time, I did a real estate podcast and was pretty public as far as a real estate person in this area, and I knew what the possible ramifications were. And my wife and my sons all agreed this is way too important to not do. So I did, and yeah, it has cost me business, and I say to people, I've kind of doubled down because it's like, hey, what are you doing today? I'm just out here selling houses and saving babies. What are you doing? I'm not going to hide it. It to me, it's akin to denying. If God gives you a work and you deny doing it and you won't even talk about it, then are you not trusting yourself and your judgment better than God's? And I understand guys that do, and I'm not decrying where everybody's in a different spot on the journey, right? But I'm where I'm at. And could I have done this when my kids were, 8, 10, 12, and 15? Probably not. It was a little bit different back then, but now, that moment, yeah, exactly, and my sons are so all about it, and it's really cool to have that support. My three best friends I've known my whole life. I still hang out with the same guys. And when we all did our guys trip a couple weeks ago, camping, our annual trip, all of them were talking about it and love what you're doing and how can we help you. And so I'm lucky that I have the support around me, my pastor, my friends. But you and I both know, I just want to go back and I want to get your opinion on this because you said something a second ago about men at these abortion survivor network events and stuff. Any pro-life event, Melissa, tell me if I'm wrong, is about 90% women.
Yeah. I always tell young men, like, hey, you want a date? Guess where you need to go to find your chances are really good. Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
use that.
Yeah, we have a representation problem first and foremost, right? In terms of how do we reach men when we don't even have men in attendance at events? Now, granted, right, you are proposing part of the solution to that, which is, right, have media and other ways to reach men. But yes, in and of itself, right, it is still predominantly female.
Yep. Guys will write a check, but they're not going to show up. We got to change that.
Yeah, and when they do show up, they are forever changed in every good way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love hearing that from men. They'll say, right, well, I wasn't planning on coming tonight. This is my wife's thing, but I decided to come at the last minute and, oh my gosh, right? Yes, let's have more oh my gosh moments. That's what
Yep.
men need. And so women who are listening, do us all a favor and bring men to the table.
And it's important to note that men don't want to be invited to the party. They want to be called to action. That's not semantical hair splitting. Men need a cause, a purpose. And so when we use the right language and we invite them to be the better version of themselves, to get involved in something that matters, I don't know anything that matters more than saving innocent lives. I just don't.
And reaching men just like them who need support and need healing. That's a incredible call to action that every man can help be a part of. How can folks find out
Yep.
more about you, Greg, and what you do with Almost Daddy?
Well, according to a PR guy I talked to last week, Google. Apparently, there's all kinds of stuff out there. But no, if anybody wanted to reach out, either learn more about what I'm doing or whatever, you can go to gregmayoauthor.com, gregmayoauthor.com. And there's a lot of information on there, past videos, op-eds I've published, and links to my books, both the novel, The Recovery Guide, and a couple other books I've written. If somebody wanted to have me speak at their event, I have signed on with the Ambassador Speakers Bureau, so you can reach out to Ambassador Speakers online, and Gloria's my agent, and she will connect you with the opportunity. But I also, beyond all that stuff, if there's a guy listening right now and he's like, man, I don't know what to do, what I think, or what I believe, but I really just wish I could talk to somebody, reach out to me on my website. I would receive the conversation without judgment. I don't care who you are, where you've been, or what you've done. If you just need to get it out, reach out. We'll talk. Because I think that's the most important thing. Plain emotional whack-a-mole is no way to live life. So if you've experienced abortion loss, or maybe you're in the middle of an abortion decision right now and you're abortion-minded, just reach out, dude. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I just want to have a conversation.
I love that. And I want to thank you for having this conversation with me, Greg. This has been one of the most important conversations that I've had in this podcast. And it certainly is not going to be my last conversation when it comes to talking about men and abortion.
Well, thanks for having me on. This has been absolutely amazing.
No, thank you. And thank you to the listeners and the audience of Life Beyond Abortion. I hope that you have found this particular interview with Greg Mayo of Almost Daddy to be maybe one that has challenged you in some ways, but I also hope that it's encouraged you and inspired you to talk about abortion and how it impacts men, to bring more men to the table so that they can be called to action and be a part of not only changing our culture, but impacting the lives of men who have already been impacted. As always, continue to like and share these episodes with others.
Life Beyond Abortion is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions on the show are those of the host and her guest, and not necessarily those of the Herzog Foundation. You can find out more about Melissa's work at melissaohden.com or by following her on Instagram at melissaohden. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode of Life Beyond Abortion.